Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, August 24th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about FiveThirtyEight. Yesterday, they re-released their 2024 election forecast. They promised to us since the day that Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race that they would be spending time adjusting their model in time for the convention to occur and the nomination to actually take place. And so yesterday, again, after the conclusion of the Democratic National Convention, FiveThirtyEight thought it would be fitting to release their 2024 election forecast almost a month after they had previously had their election forecast of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And on the day that Joe Biden departed from the race, Donald Trump led Joe Biden in the overall odds at victory, being up roughly 4% nationally in a 52-48 advantage on the day, again, that Joe Biden departed the race. Today, they've adjusted things quite tremendously. Back a month ago, their model was 80% fundamental data. Is the economy doing well? According to FiveThirtyEight, their numbers had indicated that it was on track to be quite good in time for November. Whereas approval ratings fine, not necessarily, but other fundamentals that had taken place, and just generally speaking, the urgency around the election seemed to have been the driving factor in boosting the odds for Joe Biden. Now it's flipped. It was a 4-1 fundamentals to polls model there that overestimated the amount that fundamentals would actually impact the election. Now it weighs polls in the 4 end and fundamentals on the 1 end, given that neither party is the has the incumbency advantage on their side of the aisle. But I will say, while no level of thinking around the way you do a model is going to be flawless, I do think on one end, on the Democratic end, Kamala Harris has some level of a benefit when it comes down to incumbency advantage. I do, in fact, believe that she will perform better than Joe Biden, and the numbers on FiveThirtyEight also indicate as such. Today, according to FiveThirtyEight, Kamala Harris wins 58% of scenarios. Should the election be held today, Donald Trump wins 41%. And after the Democratic convention, I think a lot of what the narrative has been from the left, and also those even amongst the mainstream media, is that Democrats are now in a point of consistency and a sense of array, a sense of being put together and unified for this party. But this cannot be lost on the fact that this election is amongst the closest we will see this century. The 21st century is a time frame in which we've had many, many close elections. Likely no election as close as the 2000 presidential election, but 2024 might come in second place for closeness of our races. To help sober us up about where we are in this election, a 58-41 advantage is actually not as large as you might think in comparison to just 4 years ago, when Joe Biden led on Election Day with a 90% chance at victory. 89% of scenarios, Joe Biden won election night in 2020. Donald Trump just had 10%. And while the eventual victor was in fact correct, the margins were off, and the expectations for Democrats were quite inflated in the last election. Granted, brand new person, brand new team on FiveThirtyEight that's looking at this model very differently, which is why I think these percentage chances here are also quite narrow. We do have to acknowledge that 2024 numbers are a bit under where Joe Biden was in 2020. This time today, August 24th, if we were to look at those numbers, Joe Biden would have been leading Donald Trump by roughly 8-9 points nationally. Today, Kamala Harris has a 4-point advantage rounding upwards. And so it isn't exactly the same position the Democrats were in 2020, even if the energy feels different, even if the enthusiasm feels different. This election by no means is a clear for Kamala Harris. It could very well be much better than it is today, but here's where we are. According to FiveThirtyEight, a 58-41 advantage. And in terms of their expectations on overall electoral vote count, well, we can go ahead and take a look, that Kamala Harris on average is receiving 287 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 251. And now what's interesting about this too is that when they first had done tracking on this model, I mean, it's no secret that FiveThirtyEight had to spend time doing this. So it meant they were able to see backdate based on the data they had on July 26th, on July 27th, on August 1st, to see what the model might have looked like before release date. And on the day they seem to have transitioned the model over, July 26th, Donald Trump led Kamala Harris in both expectation, chance at victory, and also in terms of electoral vote count. So Donald Trump was expected 276 electoral votes, Kamala Harris 262. The popular vote was meant to be narrower than it is now, and win probability was somewhere around 53% for Donald Trump. And so you can see here that consistently over the past 4 weeks, it has narrowed quite tremendously, going from a Trump favorite now to Kamala Harris now nearly having a 3/5 chance at victory this November and growing in time for November. Should this trend line continue, you're hovering all the way around to a point where Kamala Harris could win on Election Day with a 75% chance of victory based on where she is right now. that matters. And so Kamala Harris being at 287, we have to understand where exactly is this coming from? Where does the forecast say Kamala Harris is the likeliest to win? They indicate here that there are primary states they consider to be tipping point states, meaning that these might be the states that put a candidate over 270 and everything above that is negligible but can still be won by the other side of the aisle. For instance, if Kamala Harris was to win a state like Pennsylvania, that could be a tipping point state where maybe if Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina go blue as well, that in Wisconsin and Michigan, that some of those states would genuinely not matter as much because it would already be past that 270 point. And the margins there, in theory, could be easier to flip, but again, doesn't change the fact that Kamala Harris has crossed the finish line. Same thing with Donald Trump. And in terms of their expectations on this map here, it looks like Kamala Harris is the favorite in Wisconsin. It looks like Kamala Harris is the favorite in Michigan, that she's also the favorite in Pennsylvania. And what we know about our electoral map right now is that if Kamala Harris wins Nebraska's 2nd district, alongside every other state that Donald Trump, that Hillary Clinton won in 2016, with the exception of Nevada, which in this circumstance also Kamala Harris is the favorite, there's enough electoral votes here for a pathway to victory for Kamala Harris. And when you take a look at it, it actually becomes quite apparent. So if we were to talk about this map here, let's go ahead and just visualize this. We're not going to do the entire forecast because the focus of this is really these are the states that should, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris win the same states Hillary Clinton did, states like Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, and lose Nevada. If she gets Wisconsin, of course, we already said Nebraska second. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That's the exact number of electoral votes needed to win the 2024 election. But based on 538, it looks like the expectations here are that Democrats also win in Nevada. They also win in Arizona. They're losing in Georgia. They're losing in North Carolina, but they're close states, and that's good news for Democrats. Pretty much the map is going to end up here with Kamala Harris roughly just under 300 electoral votes and Donald Trump, losing this election, which is a victory that Democrats would likely be very happy about. But again, speaks to the close nature of this candidacy, because back in 2020, even Joe Biden cleared 300. So did Donald Trump in 2016. So did Barack Obama in 2012. So did he again in 2008. When you take a look at this forecast, we have to understand that this is also an odds-based forecast. There's still a 48% chance that Donald Trump wins a state like Wisconsin, or 38 in Wisconsin, or 39 in Wisconsin, 38 in Michigan, 45% chance Trump wins Pennsylvania, 46% chance Trump wins Arizona, 45 in Arizona. I mean, these are very possible things because the odds here don't say Kamala Harris is going to dominate and clear the way that many Democrats would like her to. She is still very much in a very, very close and competitive race. And we can start to see that not only extending to the presidential level, but just national numbers that show, again, Kamala Harris in a worse off position from where Democrats were in 2020. At this point in time, back in 2020, Democrats led on August 22nd in the national vote here by roughly 7 points. In 2022, it wasn't as good for Democrats because Republicans were able to maintain themselves for quite some time. But around August 22nd, Democrats are only up now today by roughly 1.5 points more than where they were back in 2022. And that is a little bit alarming. At the same time, Kamala Harris has completely rewired this election to a point where now she is the favorite, according to every metric, now including the mainstream political pundits and predictor forecasting sites like 538. Very, very reputable sources saying Kamala Harris is, in fact, the undeniable favorite for this election. Does it mean she has it in the bag? Absolutely not. But does it mean that bag has now been reopened after Joe Biden, to them, closed it? The answer is yes. Now, the 2024 forecast under Biden was also quite good for Joe Biden. But a lot of this has now been critiqued in the aftermath of the model, now that people have been given a month to really dissect it, and understanding that the model, while sure, was helpful in understanding the race, it should show Kamala Harris doing far better. But it wasn't and isn't, because the model's forecast and the way they have adjusted it has changed the way that we perceive and see races on 538. And so Kamala Harris, again, at a 58% chance, is a sobering reminder for Democrats that no matter how good an election feels, it will never be in the bag until it's there. Because Donald Trump, and I know this has been lost too on the narrative, but Donald Trump for the past 2.5 years has had all of this momentum, all of this enthusiasm, very similar crowd sizes. I know that many Democrats point at it and say, the crowd sizes are smaller. Sure. Absolutely, right? Crowd sizes have been smaller for Donald Trump as of late. They have been much smaller than they were in 2016. And obviously 2020 was a different time frame, but much smaller than 2016. equally. There are still a lot of Republicans out there that are excited and exhilarated for Donald Trump. There are voters out there that say, I do not want Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States. And so Democrats are now in a position where they need to acknowledge that, and they have been. And I think the campaign, Kamala Harris reiterates multiple times that she is the underdog in this race. This is never going to be a wash or safe and secured election in terms of electoral landslide, because that is not where we have been over the past 6 months, and it is not where we are today. Kamala Harris is in a strong position, don't get me wrong. When you take a look at these swing states, I am very impressed at the way she has turned around a race that looked like it was not going too well for Democrats. When you take a look at Arizona numbers, Kamala Harris now leading. Donald Trump led her in the initial data. Under Joe Biden, Donald Trump led quite tremendously. Even looking at states like Florida, Trump's lead has certainly narrowed from where it was before. At different points in time, it was pretty bad against Biden, though. You're talking 9, 10-point polling margins, which probably indicated even more. When you take a look at a state like Michigan, for instance, Kamala Harris again rebounding it from where it's Trump ahead by a point. Now she's ahead by 3. Pennsylvania, where Trump led Kamala Harris at different periods of time, she took that lead and now made it a 2-point lead for herself. When you look at Wisconsin, it's another example. Kamala Harris taking what was a very narrow advantage of just a point to 4 points statewide. Kamala Harris, again, has put the Democratic Party in a much better position from where it was before. This election is so incredibly important for both sides of the aisle. It will be a true reconfiguration of the Republican Party should Republicans lose this election. And for Democrats, arguably them too. But Kamala Harris has done something. She has done something that has narrowed up the way that people perceive her, the way that people want to vote for her, the way that she stands in these battleground states, and now we see it too on this election forecast. While it may not be as secured as 2020, in which Democrats actually felt very confident about this race, which is why they were shocked at how close some of these states were, the forecast indicates Kamala Harris is in for a wild ride, in for a very action-packed next 74 days, because this election, everybody, anybody, and everybody will be throwing everything at the wall, throwing everything at the campaign, throwing every dollar, every resource, every bit of energy and expense, nothing, right? Leave nothing to expense. They will go ahead and fund this race and focus on this race and spend time on this race because both sides have so much to lose. And while Kamala Harris today is in the advantage, 538 says that clear here, there is still a possibility that Donald Trump wins the race. And so I think at this point, looking at some of these data points, it is clear too why the Democratic strategy has really honed in on these battleground states. It also explains a bit of why the Trump campaign is putting a newfound emphasis on Pennsylvania and sort of pulling away from Wisconsin and Michigan. Guaranteed, they still fight for the states. They are still very much competitive. But 538 also shed some light on that, showing that Wisconsin is more Democrat than Pennsylvania. So is Michigan. In Pennsylvania in 2020 and 2016, Pennsylvania was sandwiched right in the middle, Wisconsin being the most conservative state. Right now, that is Pennsylvania. And now that Kamala Harris has grown in states like Arizona, right, where we have seen that over time, the chance at victory in terms of win probability went from Donald Trump nearly having a 2/3 chance in Arizona to now losing the state. That matters. It went from a win probability where Donald Trump was leading in Nevada now where Kamala Harris has an even larger lead than Donald Trump did at his peak. And she's narrowing down the states that matter for Republicans like Texas and Florida, even states like Ohio and Iowa, which are never going to go to Kamala Harris, but are narrowing up in a way that makes Republicans a bit more worried than they were against Joe Biden. In fact, not a bit more worried, a lot more worried. You can see a lot of panic coming from the right wing, with Kamala Harris on the ticket, especially with Governor Tim Walz. And when it comes down to home state advantages, states like Minnesota, Kamala Harris has just as much of a chance to win Minnesota as J.D. Vance does in Ohio, nearly the exact amount. And a big reason for this can be attributed to the VP nominees coming from both of these states. But Democrats have done really well in Minnesota recently and are doing really well with Tim Walz on the ticket. In New Hampshire, numbers are the same. You're starting to see Democrats do well there. In Colorado, becoming over a 90% chance that Democrats win it. In New Mexico, almost 90%. And so all in all, at large, the Democratic Party is in a really strong position, according to 538, given Kamala Harris. This winding stake here puts Pennsylvania as the tipping point state that pushes Democrats just over the finish line, with Nevada and Arizona also helping Kamala Harris get to a point where the forecasted vote share shows them in a very similar range to where they were back in 2020 and puts a lot more confidence on the Democratic side in these states and that they have a real possibility of winning. But North Carolina and Georgia right now do have Trump in the favorite as the likely winner in these two battleground states. But given the trajectory of this forecast over the past 2 months, and given where it has been released today and backdating some of this data over a month, not 2 months, we can see that Kamala Harris in her position right now is in a really strong one, and the momentum is building. The change is happening, and Kamala Harris is building to a point where now, by November, Georgia and North Carolina might be joining the Democratic Party as Democratic victories this coming cycle, and 538 really affirms that Kamala Harris has completely changed this election in favor of the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. Top left, not bottom left. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.